I am here with Jeremy Johnson, and I'm making him re-record this intro because I butchered the name of his book, and I want to do it justice. So Jeremy is an author, host of a podcast, editor, and his book, the infamous Seeing Through the World, Gene Gepsler and Integral Consciousness. Did I do it?
Almost. Gepster.
Jeremy was a dear friend and colleague of my brother's. He hosts the podcast Mutations. Got that one?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Michael is on episode 5. You definitely should check out that conversation. And Jeremy, I think the last time you had a kind of longer conversation with Michael on TMBS was episode 103. And today, Jeremy and I watched Michael's live stream, which everyone should check out, from July 16th. Michael had this really beautiful live stream. It's about 20 minutes. And we're about to play a clip, and it's like the 8 minutes in the middle, and Michael just really gets going and just really starts breaking down what this, international cosmopolitan socialist, kind of theory and what he meant by that, and what he thought we needed to be open to, and how we had to be nuancing and widening our thinking to really get there. And Jeremy, if you just want to say hello, I love your Jacobin. I love your Against the Web. Thanks for that.
Of course. Glad to represent. But yeah, again, thank you for having me on TMBS. It's an honor to be speaking with you and to be talking with the TMBS community. I think this video is a really good example of the kind of thinking Michael was advocating for that the left needed, and that really kind of comes across, and we'll talk about it in the recording after his clip, that complex thinking and flexibility and empathy are just so vital for the left. And this is really a kind of, I think we mentioned this as well, this is what our project is, in terms of what do we do now, and how does the left continue to evolve. And I think Michael had a very clear vision.
So this is a model that is about what does it actually mean to be truly global to the extent we can, local, national, and international simultaneously, east, west, north, south, but from a place of actual growth and empathy. And this is where, again, this questions of consciousness come in. The questions of cultivating empathy, cultivating compassion, cultivating awareness, the complete antithesis of social media modes. Long-term thinking, compassion, seeing complexity, comfort with oneself, solitude, the opposite of instant gratification, the attempt to constantly humanize and not dehumanize your fellow humans. These are all completely countervailing forces to the market technologic that subsumes all of us today. And so integral theory, which is something that a lot of, it covers a lot of people. Sri Aurobindo was a great Indian integral theorist. William Irwin Thompson was a fascinating public intellectual. The most well-known guy is probably a guy named Ken Wilber, who I'll tell you, in my opinion, has some, he's, when it comes to things like politics, policy, history, this is not the guy, I'll put it, it's very diplomatic, it's just not his strong suit. He's not informed or up on that stuff, and it affects his analysis. But this model has definitely created some brilliant maps of integrating worldviews, which we really need to do. We need to have a much greater understanding of both how other people are seeing, experiencing, and then enacting in the world. This is a necessity. It's a necessity with all of the extraordinary splits in the United States and the kind of serious analysis we need to figure out even the different types of ruling class right now in this society. Thank you so much. And it also is going to be very necessary as the United States declines, relatively speaking. That's one of the things, that shows up in the China coverage on the show. Of course, we need to talk about the crisis dealing, and the horrific repression of the Uyghurs as an example. And I care quite a bit about the Tibetan oppression as well. But we also need to understand literally the Chinese worldview to the extent we can. We need to understand these things, not in and in a bipartisan way, and well beyond that boring word in the United States. Not in that milquetoast centrist, we all just figured out and meet in some crappy middle, but literally that we need to humanize as many as possible and then try to create cohesion to enact real systems change. Because right now you see so much of these velocity of serious social action in the United States. I mean, we're still hugely behind. There isn't the countervailing force of labor to capital. These uprisings are extraordinary. Where are they going? In some good directions, but also the new boon in the toxic, horrifying, grotesque HR industry, the diversity consulting scam, which is often just companies covering their asses from discrimination lawsuits they should face with very little empirical basis in the research. And then, of course, a renewal and another cycle of the horrifying toxicity of online culture. So we need to get to this place of humanization, understanding, and synthesis. And ultimately, my frame is that cosmopolitan socialist frame. That's what I'm most excited about. But the integral frame, what it does is it has, among other things, a quadrant model, which I think is fascinating. I'll just explain it to that. This is the book. It's not a great, I mean, it's a good book. It's got some good theory. It's very dated in other ways, but it's got some good outlines here. It's called The Theory of Everything by Ken Wilber. And the quadrants map different views of the world. What you have on the right side is objective systems, and on the left side, subjective systems. And then you have at the base social, and at the top individual. I could be actually mixing those up. So in other words, let's take it, really clearly. You're an individual, you're dealing with something like depression, which familiar with. There could be subjective and objective components of it. Maybe maybe there's something happening with you physiologically. You address it that way. But then there's also deep questions of your life and meaning and how you feel and how you treat others and how you're treated. And those are the subjective realms. They both matter. In the social systems, there's objective systems. There's objective systems. That this is the way we move currency. This is how technology works. This is how economy works. But then there's always cultural stories that correlate with them, right? This is, again, we go back historically, we look at the rise of the taxonomy of European racism and white supremacy. It correlates. There's the expansion of colonialism and imperialism, and then we do, and then those cultures manifest taxonomies of other human beings and stories and narratives, religious and quote unquote scientific, to justify racism. Those things are working in the objective and subjective realms. And so what he does is he kind of shows you that a lot of different worldviews, they all can have validity, but they're usually coming from one of these different viewpoints. A lot of people will say, like, okay, the main source of the action is individual subjectivity, right? The main source of the action is individual objectivity. The main source of the action is social materiality, or the main source of the action is cultural stories and myths. And the answer from Wilber, and the answer actually, if you read Gramsci in a certain way, is integral, and then it's all of the above. And then we start to have this perspective of wanting to have some flexibility in how we look at things, and a deep tolerance, like the tolerance that someone like Pepe Mujica talks about. Not a kind of, you just got to tolerate everybody. It's deeper, because also ultimately you do. It's another dynamic. Tolerate everything. You have battles in politics, but you want to understand the engine of different worldviews. And in that mix, he's including, and meta-modernism in certain ways points to this, and certainly, Jeremy Johnson, the contemplative work. And at its best, some connection to a spiritual practice or any type of conscientious cultivation of empathy, we're all trying and we're all failing. That's the point. That also cultivates the self-compassion, is going to give us some of the capacity to have some of the sort of flexibility of mind and emotions to move in between worldviews, pivot in between them, and start to create some of that synthesis, that sort of real range of empathy and intellect.
Well, that's quite a dense clip. I feel like there's multiple, it seems like Michael is kind of writing many theses within that, that was only part of a 20-minute live stream. I suggest everyone go and watch all 20 minutes. But Jeremy, I mean, do you want to just start off with just this idea of how, I guess my takeaway, and maybe this is different than yours, but I guess like the fundamental thread that I hear Michael's touching on is cultivating this deep empathy and this ability to not only understand our truth and be clear in that, but also understand that there can be so many truths. And I feel like so much of what Michael practiced and emulated was deep empathy and compassion and clarity that there was great evil and really horrific things happening in the world, but also everyone's reality is valid. And that is their truth. So I know that's like quite a jumping off point, but that was kind of, I don't know, at least how I interpreted what he was getting at.
No, I thought essentially the same thing in this presentation. Like, we need to have empathy for where people are coming from, but it's not enough just to have the intellectual assessment that, okay, here's the historical analysis, or here are the general conceptions of this particular worldview. We also have to go like, what is the experience that people are enacting in the world? Why are they driven to do this? Like, can I empathize enough with them to understand? And I think it's also important that he did mention, like, political battles are still going to happen. There's still going to be conflict. It's just, we have to be coming from a place where we really understand our opponent, in a sense. And almost, I used to practice martial arts when I was a little younger, and there's this kind of sense of really kind of becoming your opponent in that sort of exchange, on the battlefield or in the dojo, or whatever you want to call it. So like, I think there is this empathy taking that's really important, and it's central to a capacity to take that other position. And you need both. You need like the empathetic capacity, which is like a consciousness capacity, and then you also need more of the kind of cognitive, intellectual curiosity to go ahead and read your opponents and read what the intellectual dark web is talking about and how they're organizing their worldview. If you can't, then you're not really going to be able to reach them. You're not really going to be able to understand their motivations and drives. And ultimately, it's doing a disservice to, the ultimate aims that Michael was talking about in terms of creating a better world, creating a more, cosmopolitan socialism, an ecumenical planetary culture, so we need that capacity. It's like, I think it's really, that was what I got from it. Just, we need to develop these capacities, both of empathy and cognitive flexibility. And so integral theory for Michael, and for me as well, was like an introduction to that. And he kind of goes into the quadrant analysis, and he talks about, you have to kind of consider the subjective and the intersubjective and the systems, but then also the individual, and then also maybe, the biological and medical. So like, everything's kind of in that picture. But I like to think of integral theory as a sort of like a training wheel situation, where it's teaching us to think with complexity and kind of nudging us to make that a daily practice in terms of like understanding what's going on in the world. And as a start.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. And I see this behavior in myself, and I see it a lot on the left, where lots of times the impulse to kind of narrow one's thinking or shut something out comes from a reaction of like seeing something that feels really grotesque or hateful. And so the impulse is to like protect the people around you or protect yourself from this type of thinking. But then, you know, it's challenging terrain to navigate, like, you know, retraining your brain to hold multiple truths, but also not make any, you know, justification or exceptions for things that just truly need to end. You know, Michael was so good at saying like, it's disgusting, that's bad analysis, that's incorrect. But I think oftentimes the reason he was able to speak just so definitively and so clearly was because he was holding so many truths at once. It wasn't just that he kept, we talked about this yesterday when we were on the phone, like the idea of not just reading to reinforce your worldview.
Exactly.
So I guess when I'm listening to Michael, when I'm listening to you, and you know, my understanding of integral theory is very thin. I've read a little bit of Wilbur. It kind of ends in the color wheel of it all. But it's like kind of, how do we encourage, you know, feeling like you're standing in what's important to you culturally and morally, but also challenging yourself to kind of stretch your thinking, not to compromise what you feel is right and wrong, but to deepen and make what you feel or see as right and wrong in the world something that you can kind of express and connect with more people around.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of what you see that?
Yeah, like almost developing a kind of resiliency, like knowing you can go into a different media bubble and actually know that language and still be firmly situated in a critique of it. But actually your critique goes deeper because you're really kind of hearing, empathizing, understanding that orientation or perspective worldview, and then being able to, there's more power in that. There's more power in them actually feeling like your opponent actually feeling heard and acknowledged and not straw manning their position, and really getting under their skin in a way. And I think that develops a capacity in you of resilience in being able to do that, right? So I think Against the Web was a good example because Michael was engaging with the IDW for a number of years and Sam Harris and all that stuff. I don't know how deeply you want to go into all that, but he was able to really kind of look at what they were actually saying and at least take it seriously enough to deconstruct it. And then I think the other element of this isn't just deconstruction and kind of like winning over the right, but really kind of answering some of these very human drives that would drive people towards, you know, the IDW in terms of meaning making, spirituality, living a meaningful, fulfilling life, which is very difficult. And what did he call it? The market techno logic, right? This sort of deep sense of atomization so many people are feeling. And so, you know, we have to look at the motivations and drives that people are going to these communities or orienting around, and what those are actually like subjectively like. And then when you do that, I think you stand a better chance to say like, look, I understand where you're coming from. I understand the tensions here, but here's another offering. And I think this is what he really wanted to do, Michael, in the sense of like offering a constructive, regenerative, synthesis-oriented left, which was not afraid of spirituality, not afraid of, you know, meaning making, but also deeply, deeply rooted and grounded in material analysis. And yeah, I mean, I think, but to do that, we really kind of need this capacity for intellectual curiosity. I've been floating this word around. It's from a paper by Neri Oxman. She's calling it anti-disciplinarity, just like really being voracious in our intellectual curiosity and jumping across disciplines and looking at different perspectives and just sort of seeing how those differences can actually kind of combine into something novel and emergent. And so I think Michael was just really good at that, just naturally. And so integral theory for him was like, oh, that's kind of my brain, right? So, and I think he was encouraging the left to take that up as a capacity because, as he says, like, it's so necessary today.